Hello, we're going to take a little look at some of XCOM 2's equipment and gear. We're going to do that by looking at some potential loadouts that I think are pretty suitable, and you might consider when you get your hands on XCOM 2, hopefully soon. We're going to look at some equipment and gear, armor, weapons, weapon upgrades, and also some PCS chips. Let's start off here with our gunner Mina Voss. Now let's take a look at her loadout. Mina Voss is more of a blade-focused ranger. She focuses on getting into combat, getting up to melee range, and then hitting with the sword. So we're going to build her based around that. Let's have a look at some of the gear. For a start, I'm going to stick her in the spider suit. Now for the purposes of this equipment and gear, we're going to take a look at basically the first tier you unlock past your basics, which is you've got plated armor, and then you've got magnetic weapons. So the spider suit is one of the Proving Grounds special plated armors you can build. Fans of Enemy Unknown and Enemy Within will remember the, I believe it was known as the skeleton suit there. I'm not sure, Long War changed its name, but it's the mobile armor. It gives you a grappling hook, which has been buffed in XCOM 2, and it gives you more mobility and more dodge. It also gives you more health, that +6 is coming from the armor here. Normally this trooper would only have +2 health, the spider pops it up by another 4. Now, the different armors in XCOM 2 all give roughly the same health. The Exo might give like 1 extra bit of health, and the Exo generally has an extra point of armor, whereas the other armors of its tier won't. But in general, they're about equal. That's a really big change already when you're talking about armor, because in old XCOM, if I remember right anyway, it was very much like if you took the grappling armor, you lost a lot of health for your trouble. And in a lot of senses, I never took the lighter armor because staying alive was already difficult enough and was my top priority. So I very rarely took the spider suit or skeleton suit back then, and I didn't get to use the cool, fun abilities like grapple and mobility as much. In XCOM 2, they've all got pretty comparable survivability, and it's just they're balanced by their different abilities, which is very cool. You can use them all for different classes for lots of different reasons. So if you're looking at the spider suit here, that grapple has been buffed because that grapple is now a free action. It has a cooldown of like 2 to 3 turns or something, but you cannot devalue how important that is. The grapple being a free action is just incredibly good. We'll go into some more uses for it later as we talk about the sharpshooter, but just on your ranger, when you're a blade kind of focused ranger, that's obviously very helpful for you because you need to get into melee range. Speed and mobility and getting around the map are very important for you, especially they've revealed already the Reaper perk that lets you chain melee kills together. Every time you get a melee kill, you get a yellow move back to go and attack another melee person, or attack another person with melee, and as long as you keep killing people with your blade, you keep getting more turns in that turn. Your turn doesn't end. So the spider suit's great because if you're in the middle of a Reaper chain and you see an enemy but you're not quite close enough, you might be able to grapple over to them. If you're in an urban environment or if they're near a cliff, you might be able to grapple over and then continue your massacre spree. The extra mobility also is going to help with your blading, and that also brings us to our speed. But before we go, I'll also mention, well, we'll leave the dodge. That also brings us to our speed. Now, personal combat sims, I'll let you know this once in case you don't know what the PCS is. You can see it right here. PCS, these are basically little chips that you give your soldiers boosts with. Think of them like little free stat party packs. You can give your soldiers stats with these things, you find them as loot. So there's a couple of different ones. I'd say there's 3 different PCSs I very highly value for a ranger. It's health, mobility, or dodge. And those are 3 different directions you can go in of your ranger. Health doesn't need much explanation. The ranger gets up in the front line a lot. You want to keep him safe with health. Dodge, or agility, gives you extra dodge. Dodge is a stat in XCOM 2, which you might not be familiar with because it's a new stat compared to the old XCOM. Basically, dodge is a chance out of 100 to dodge any shot that hits you. If you roll that chance, the damage is, I believe, halved. The damage is reduced considerably. So dodge is quite a good stat to have. You can see here that the spider suit gives us 20 dodge as well. So that's excellent, and that means if you do happen to get shot, you're going to have that damage reduced a lot. That's generally helpful, I think. You want to focus on dodge if you can stack it really high so that it's reliable, and then if you have armor. Because the more armor you have, you're already having damage reduced, and then by dodging, you're also going, I mean, if you can reliably dodge, you're going to add that to your armor, and a shot that deals 8 damage, if you have 2 armor and you dodge it, you know, you might only take 2 damage. That's a huge difference. But in the case with Mina Gunnar Voss, who has an ironic nickname considering what I've picked her for, when we're using the blade, I feel like speed is the most important thing, and we're not stacking dodge, we're using the spider suit, we don't have any armor. Let's go with mobility. That's why we've picked that PCS. Now that explains the dodge stat, which I was going to come back to with the spider suit, so let's move on now to our weapons and our equipment here. So, like I said, the different suits are balanced by their different capabilities. The mobility grapple suit is balanced by having extra mobility and the grapple and the dodge. The exosuit can carry a heavy weapon with it, and has sometimes a little bit extra health, and always an extra pip of armor. And then the standard armor that you get, you don't have to build that specially, you just build, once you've built one suit of that, you've got it for your whole team, and that armor carries with it 2 item slots. Now, that's very powerful, of course, but there's quite a few classes where I actually value the power of the spider suit or the exosuit over that extra item slot, and the ranger is one of them. Generally where I feel like they can get away with 1 item, they don't benefit hugely from having 2 items. So here, we've got the hazmat vest equipped for the ranger, and like I was mentioning with Reaper before, I've got a very specific thing in mind when I build this ranger. I really enjoy grenadiers. I bring 2 grenadiers in every squad I can, whenever I can, so far anyway. And what I really like about that is the different types of grenades you can get as well. Some of those grenades are like acid grenades, fire grenades, gas grenades, and I frequently like to just lace my enemies and just... You'll have these situations where all these enemies are on low health, caught in this cloud of fire or acid or poison, or maybe all 3 at once, depending on how bad the turn was. That's why the hazmat vest is a little pickup I've got here for my ranger. This way, she's immune to fire, she's immune to acid, she's immune to poison. It gives her a little bit of extra health, because we don't have the extra health from our PCS, we use mobility instead. We have a little bit extra health because we're not using an exo, so that pops her back up. And I should mention, I believe before I said the extra 2+2 health is from Kevlar, that was a goof on my part. The extra +2 health is from the hazmat vest, then +4 from the spider suit, that's my bad. But anyway, the point being, your ranger's going to be able to run through your clouds of fire, acid, poison, whatever if you're using those grenades, no problem. It's also going to make her immune to fire, acid, and poison from any enemies who spew it at her. So it means Vipers aren't going to be able to poison your ranger, and if your ranger's poisoned or on fire, it can really mess with their ability to use stuff like their sword, and it can really cut their mobility down, which is how your ranger is going to be effective. Now let's finally take a look at Mina Gunnar Voss's weapon. So for a Blade Ranger's weapon, what I value is slightly different to a more shooty kind of ranger, but fairly similar. I think on all rangers, all shotgunners, anybody who gets close to the enemy, you're going to want a laser sight. The laser sight gives you a flat +10 crit chance, which on its own is good. And you might put it on your snipers because you just want that +10 crit. Obviously, these are the second tier of upgrades. There are multiple tiers, and the higher the tier goes, the better the bonuses, so you can get an even higher critical chance with a better laser sight. But here's the thing, that chance gets better with proximity to the target. That up to triples at point blank range. So your rangers are always getting in close, and so are your blade masters, as I call, you know, the sword focused ranger builds. So what you're going to want with your laser sight is you're going to get in point blank, and suddenly you've got like well, with this particular laser sight, you'd have +30 crit at point blank. That's going to triple. So that's obviously insanely good. With the right build, you can very easily have your rangers running at 100% crit, no problem. In fact, you can have a lot of people running at 100% crit with the right build, but it's the rangers who are most of the time going to be making that point blank use of it. And there's an item known as, well, we'll get to that in a second once we look at the other type of ranger. The other thing that I value that's different to the other type of ranger I build is the hair trigger. Normally, if I was shooting the shotgun a lot, I'd want an autoloader, so I can keep the ammo flowing, but with my Blade Ranger, I'm more commonly using my sword, so in this case, I kind of lean towards something a little bit more cheeky, which is the hair trigger. This gives you a chance that every time you shoot, that shot may be free. So if you trigger that free shot, then in this case the 10% on the advanced hair trigger, that's going to let you take another shot absolutely free, or it's just not going to cost an action. So you can move again, you can sword again, you can do whatever you want. I find because with a Blade Ranger, you're generally using the sword, that when you do use the shotgun, it's rarer. And in that sense, you don't need to stick a lot of upgrades on it that increase its performance hugely or give it a lot more ammo. And in that sense, when you do occasionally take a shot with your ranger, with the blade, with the advanced hair trigger, you might occasionally, after a couple of missions, find, hey, I got a free shot. And that can be quite helpful. It can get you out of some bad situations. You don't depend on it with a blade ranger, but it's a nice thing to have. It's a little gift for you. And that should just about cover the blade ranger. For something a little bit different, let's look at a more shooty kind of ranger. Now with this ranger, we're going to be running perks that focus not on the sword, but just focus on general purpose utility and damage and a little bit of stealth. So we're not worrying about the sword. The sword's our secondary weapon, it's a last resort, and we're more focusing on the accuracy and critical power and just raw damage of the shotgun. So in this case, we have a slightly different build. We don't need mobility as much because we're going to be picking up run and gun most likely, and that takes care of a lot of our mobility problems. I know that the Sword Ranger already has run and gun built into their sword strikes, but with them you need the mobility because if you can't make it all the way up to point blank, you can't shoot. Whereas with a run and gun ranger, if you can get within 3 or 4 tiles, it's just as good as point blank in most cases, so you don't need the mobility as much. And in that sense, we're going to go ahead and use the exosuit. The exosuit doesn't have the mobility or the dodge of the spider suit, and it still only has 1 item slot, technically, compared to the normal armor. But what it does have is an extra pip of armor, a lot of health, quite a lot of health, and it has a, well, not too much more, like I was saying before, and it also has a heavy weapon, which is quite helpful for a ranger. So let's go through these things one at a time. Now, don't be fooled, that's not +7 armor fully from the exosuit. In this sense, we've also given Sarge Apone, we've given him a advanced conditioning PCS, that's given him +2 health. All of these bonuses are also going to be magnified, in fact, let me do it right now. Like I was saying, all these bonuses are going to be magnified by your guerrilla training tactic, integrated warfare, I believe it's called, which increases the bonuses of your PCS systems as well, so that's very helpful. And in this sense, because we don't need the mobility as much, you could go for aim or something else if you like, or the other thing you can do is dodge. Like I was saying before, with someone like this, if you want to be a tank and you want to stack your armor, you can either go health or dodge. In this case, because you can't stack a whole lot of armor on a ranger because they don't get blast padding like grenadiers do, I don't think of them as a main tank who can really make that as attractive as a grenadier, so I like to stick health on them, just make them stronger in the poor event that they do get shot, and focus on killing things before they kill them. The health is just there as an insurance policy. You could stick aim on these guys and use that to shoot your way through cover as well. You could run up and point blank a guy through heavy cover with an aim PCS, I'm sure, on one of your rangers. No problem at all. But it's pretty self-explanatory. The exosuit's extra health and armor keeps you quite safe. Now, if you move down to the heavy weapon, this is the other thing afforded to you by the exosuit. And there's multiple different kinds of heavy weapons you can get, but you need to be using an exosuit type armor to wield one of these. Everyone knows about the rocket launcher, there's also a flamethrower, and there's some other cool types out there. I like the flamethrower or a rocket launcher on the exosuit for a ranger because rangers are very strong, but unless you have a grenade in their inventory slot, they're not exactly great ranged AoE damage dealers. And I think having a flamethrower or a rocket launcher means in those clutch turns when you need entire groups of enemies destroyed and your ranger isn't up to the task because he's only going single target, you've got your heavy weapon, boom. If your ranger is in a situation where you're in a very tough fight but you can't afford to run up and use the power of your ranger, boom. These heavy weapons usually have a pretty long range. Even the flamethrower is just spewing that fire at a very long range. So I think having the heavy weapon is a very nice way to round out your ranger and make them effective in more situations than they normally would be. Now, getting back to their main purpose, which is destroying the hell out of at least one target a turn, Talon rounds are one of my favorite items. You might remember in an Enemy Within Reaper rounds. Reaper rounds weren't too popular, especially not with me, because they had quite a punishing range penalty on them that made your shotguns even worse at long range, and your sniper rifles even worse at short range, even though that was less noticeable. And they gave you like an extra +20 crit. I feel like Talon rounds have become one of my favorite items in XCOM 2 just because of the laser sight. Because the laser sight lets you stock so much crit chance up already, the Talon rounds give you that little bit of extra oomph to basically put yourself up to like 100% crit almost all the time when the enemy is flanked, or like 80 or 90% crit when they are not flanked. It just gives you so much crit. It just gives you so much crit. So stacking that crit up to 100%, obviously, if you have a guy with 20 crit on his own with talent rounds, it's not super useful. If you have a guy with 100 crit, that's what you call reliable. You can start running up to people and knowing you're going to do just ridiculous amounts of damage because you know you can count on that 100%, 90%, 80% crit. Plus, talent rounds now give you a bonus critical damage as well. They give you 1 extra damage on crits, and that's just even better when your job is to crit things in the face. But if you find that your crit chance is a bit excessive and you don't need talent rounds because, you know, quite frankly, you don't really need them to have already a good crit chance, you could stick whatever you want on there. You could put a grenade, you know, a piece of armor to keep you safe, anything like that. I just like talent rounds because it makes that crit totally reliable. And part of that, of course, is if we take a look at their weapon, you can see right here again, the laser sight, very, very important to me on a ranger. That crit chance just multiplies so well as you get closer. But then, like I was saying before, the autoloader is what I value on a shooty ranger, and that's a no-brainer. The assault or the ranger, I use the terms interchangeably sometimes, sorry. The ranger is really there to be your ace in the hole. For those turns when no one else can help you, you can either run up and blade someone, or in this case, run up and run and gun someone, and take them out. They kind of have the motto, when all else fails, send me in. And that's why you want your advanced autoloader. If you're in the middle of a tough fight, maybe you've spent one of your shotgun shells on Overwatch, you spent a couple more in the fight, maybe you're almost out of ammo, or you are out of ammo, you don't want to have your clutch run and gun fail because you didn't have ammo and you can't make it work. The advanced autoloader is there to say, you know what, your main job is shooting this shotgun, I'm there for you. I'm going to give you a free reload whenever you need it. And you're going to be able to run and gun whenever the commander wants you to. Run and gun to your death whenever the commander needs you to. So that's what I think is a really good loadout for the ranger. If you're a shooty ranger. Keep in mind as well that there's a continent bonus that gives you a third weapon upgrade slot as well. And in those cases, I probably recommend you get a hair trigger for your shooty rangers as well, because obviously it's also a hair trigger is a good thing for a nice to have, don't use my gun often guy, but obviously a hair trigger is even better for someone who's shooting all the time. I'm not blind to that. If you're shooting all the time, you're going to proc that hair trigger chance much more often, but I value having the ammo much more over hair trigger when I'm shooting more often. But if you have a third slot, go for it. Stick a hair trigger on as well, stick whatever you want on, go nuts. So that's our ranger. Let's take a look at a sharpshooter right here. Now, with your sharpshooter, I'll start with the PCS because that's a no-brainer.